the mic's on, OG. Let's get going. Let's talk. Yo, it's the D.E.P. Development, economics, and politics. A solid mix beyond the script. We set the TV free, unlock portals to social cohesion and unity. You and me in conversation, concentration, contemplation on the landscape, systems that's man-made. Suggesting reforms to make the land great. Zanzibar, Panzibar. We sit down.
Welcome to the D.E.P. with Ongama Mtimka. It's the second episode. Today we are discussing the history of the Eastern Cape in particular, especially the politics or the political economic history of AmaXhosa. One colleague of mine mentioned the point that when we got democracy in South Africa, we did not do as the West Africans did, the intellectual work of rewriting the history and making sure that from an Afrocentric perspective, we tell the story of how we have become as a people. And the East African adage goes, unless lions have their own historians, all tales about the hunt glorify the hunter. Well, we have seen some works being done, even though at a slow pace, which I regard as redemptive work that look at the province of the Eastern Cape and South Africa from a different perspective. I am greatly honored today to have Dr. JJ Klaas, who has done amazing work, first of all, personally, getting a bachelor's degree at the University of Fort Hare, getting his master's at the University of Oklahoma in the US, and then going on to get his PhD at the University of Cambridge. This is somebody whose story you want to listen to, and I'm greatly honored today to have him in studio. Doc, thank you for gracing the DEP. Welcome.
Thank you, Klass. Cool. Thank you for the opportunity.
Siyabulela. Kanene sakho ngubani isiduko?
Oh, Mvulane, Ncilashi ukhetha ubhayi umsudu.
Siyabulela, Ncilashi. Siyabulela. Thank you for gracing us with your presence. You are in Gqeberha. What brings you to the Eastern Cape?
I was invited here yesterday by the Nelson Mandela Metro Municipality as part of the 24th September celebrations. It was a great honor for me to be there yesterday.
Great stuff. And I think we really enjoyed your input there. Quite a riveting input. People who wonder, they've seen you at AU, you've been a diplomat there, you've held different roles within the government. Who is JJ Klaas?
JJ Klaas is Umsutu born in Stutterheim, who didn't know how to read or write until he was age 11. Grew up in Kaiskamahoek, whose life was shaped by some of the greatest teachers we've ever seen. And then we had the opportunity now to plow back to the nation. So I'm at a stage now saying, look, I've been very fortunate in my life. I've had great mentors. Now it's time for me to give back. That's where I am.
That's amazing. I've seen in the book that you have written, Relentless Pursuit, where you're making reference to a farm having been part of the challenge for your early start in education. Can you tell us about that a little?
It was not easy. I don't want to lie. I remember in the 1980s when there was, I think, a war in Angola, and I used to see dead soldiers in the magazine. I didn't know what was happening. I couldn't read. I think it was a big frustration for me at age 10, 11, not knowing how to read or write. So I was anxious.
Wow.
Yeah, so the moment then I had the opportunity to go to school at age 11, I decided to grab that. And I remember when later in my years, studying high school, university, I ended up adopting a quote from Shakespeare, Julius Caesar. Utipaya, I quote, "There is a tide in the affairs of men, taken in the flood, leads on to fortune. On such a full sea are we now afloat. We must take the current while it flows. Omitted, all the voyages of thy ship abound in shallows and in miseries." Unquote. I think I use that as the fulcrum of my life. where I wanted to use every opportunity because I knew that I was late. So hence I pushed to a point where I passed primary school at age 17, passed high school at age 22. Then I cracked my four-year BPED degree at 14 in 4 years. I never failed a single course, not because I was clever, but I was a hard worker. I was very focused. And I went to Oklahoma, did my master's, record time, 11 A's and 1 B.
Wow.
Then went to Cambridge. In Cambridge, in 3.5 years, I did MPhil and a PhD. Done.
Wow.
I remember my supervisor used to say, no, you'll take here 5 to 7 years because you're from Africa. I said, look, I don't have time. So I think for me, the essence of time has always been a driving point. Hence then, when COVID started, I said, look, I'll be at home. What will I be doing? That's when then, during COVID, I started writing this book from that one. So for me, the issue of time, using opportunities, has always been a driving point.
Wow.
Even now, I still feel, but I've not done enough.
Wow, that's amazing. So in my writing about what are the paths to creating an inclusive economy in South Africa, I cannot escape the role of the self, the agency of the individual.
Yes.
Even as we talk about the grander things that need to be done that are systemic. So, for example, I spent about 10 years doing business support services. So writing business plans, feasibility studies, helping people register companies and have them, start their businesses. What was interesting for me was there were many of these entrepreneurs that were excluded. There were many of these people who were taking great initiative. And I've been saying, South Africa, if we could get a lot more people affirmed in their abilities to do things, and then enhance that potential by enabling it to succeed, because people want to succeed. I don't know what you make of that.
I think you're right. It's just that people differ in degrees of perseverance. Other people don't have enough courage and strength to withstand these challenges. It's not because you and I didn't have those challenges. We all had these challenges. We all somehow in our lives felt excluded. But you have to persist. But then we differ in terms of that ability to persist.
Okay.
That's what I think marks the difference. I'll make one example. When I was doing my first year at Forte, there was Chamber of Mines bursary I was supposed to get because my father was a mine worker. But because of family politics, my father divorced from my mother, and then my father was late at that time. Now, here I am, getting forms of Chamber of Mines for my first year. I want to get full bursary. The bursary is available. No, you need maculoscope of your father. I go to my father's people to say, can I get maculoscope? But no.
What's maculoscope?
It was a code, like a card.
Oh, okay.
Like an access card we use at work.
Oh, okay.
But they used to call it maculoscope.
Sure.
So then I didn't get the bursary. The bursary is there. All you need the working card of my late father. The family refused. I could have given up, but I didn't. I had to work myself up, then try to enter for competitions of debate to be able to get money to buy shoes, like basic things.
Sure.
The other instance, for example, at Forte that I could have easily given up was on my final year when Professor Mzamani recommended that I must go for staff development program to proceed studying master's degree in abroad so that I come back and work at Forte.
Okay.
But again, I'm not going to be specific on this, but because of politics at Forte with management, someone refused to sign that. And it shattered me. And I was like, no, man.
Quick one. Were there other people that applied and got that signature?
No, this one, remember, was the Vice Chancellor's prerogative.
Okay.
For people to go for staff development program. So what they would do, they would work with deans of faculties. They identify key people. So from the Faculty of Education, person was identified. There were other people, but not many. It was a rare privilege. So in my case then, because someone says I'm not going to sign it, because this person was not in good terms with my mentor. And then So I saw myself having to go and teach in the rural areas, worst part that year in 97. At that time, I was supposed to be at the University of Wisconsin. I was already in touch with the university. We're looking at the programs I was going to do there.
Sure.
And then that thing shattered me to a point where I could have easily given up. I refused. So coming back to your question, I'm not saying people who give up are wrong or are weak, but we differ in terms of the degrees of persistence.
Well, the book is Relentless Pursuit, Memoirs of a Relentless Pursuit, and it's available. Dr. JJ Klaas has got this book for you. You can get in touch. How can they get the book?
They can order the book. They can just go to email me at jongiclass007@gmail.com. Klass is Klaas. jongiclass007@gmail.com.
Check out the comments section. We're going to be uploading, we're going to be typing in those details for you. I really want you to get the book because you see, to be able to advance in life, it takes, as we hear from Dr. Klaas, individual effort and then a relentless pursuit. There are many obstacles along the path, but if you are committed to eventually succeeding, you take the detours along the way and you eventually succeed. Now, let's talk national politics.
Okay.
You have done what my colleague Namalanga Mkhize says we failed to do in Africa, in South Africa after independence. So she makes the point, and this was, and I have permission from her to say this. So we're busy reviewing our strategy as a department. And among her comments is that, you see, immediately after independence in West Africa and elsewhere in Latin America, the natives started the intellectual exercise of documenting the history in the right way, challenging some of the Eurocentric conceptualizations and interpretations of history. As the East African adage goes, unless lions have their own historians, all tales about the hunt glorify the hunter. Now, you've done the work. Congratulations, Doc. Really. This is amazing. Triangle of 100 Years of Wars. What do you say in this book?
I think this book, it started with my experience as a history student at Forte, where I just felt that even at that time, there was something missing here. I don't think they are really teaching us the real history. But I couldn't do anything because at that time, the pressure, remember, I was old. I needed to finish the degree, go and work. So I felt, look, I don't really have time to fight this. Let me just imbibe it and then become certificated. It's interesting that many years later, I think it was last year, when Utataka Sandile Swan, the one who comments.
Lovely.
Yeah, his father, Utata Swana, he's told me the same thing, but what you encountered at Forte in 19, that's what he encountered when he graduated at Forte in 1959. Uti, he was very angry. One of his majors was history. What they could tell that these guys are actually teaching them lies. And Uti, it went to a point where my lecturer stopped teaching us. We just go and read in the library and then we write examinations. Because what you are telling us is not right.
What race was the teacher?
It was a white Afrikaner male.
Okay.
Yeah. So
Sorry, by the way, Doc, was that the same for your time?
No, he was there. He graduated in 1959.
Sure.
But the man was not there
when you were getting this history
in 1997.
1990s.
No, it was a different generation.
Okay. Yeah. But white, black? I mean, this is
no. At that time at Forte, there were, I think, about 3 white males.
Okay. 1
female African, and then 1 male African.
Yeah. But you're saying the issue was with the content itself.
Yes. This was not. What really bothered us about history was about the content first. Second, how it was presented in the classroom.
Sure.
So Mr. Swana, in 1959, when he left Forte, he was angry. So after he read this book, justice has been done at last.
Wow.
Thank you, young man, because with him, he decided to follow economics. I think it became one of the first recipients of MPA in 1980s. So he followed him. He went to the business and Anglo-American and all that. So he left history completely. So he says to me, I was courageous enough that after many years, I went back to correct what I thought was needed to be corrected at 40 many years ago.
So you were answering the question of what you found. And I mean, one of the things that got me to say we have to do this recording was you telling stories about the military prowess of AmaXhosa.
Yes.
But first, I thought that what you were doing, I got the books, by the way, but I still need to read it.
Yes.
I thought what Dr. Klaas is doing, with especially explaining the role of Tunga in defending the westerly part of the province.
Yes.
Please tell us about that.
Tunga was he still remains one of the unsung visionary leaders of the 19th century. He comes from a nation of AmaXhosa, whose formation also was very peculiar in the history of AmaXhosa. Because who are AmaXhosa? AmaXhosa are the descendants of people who were condemned to die during the era of King Chiu. Now, the person who was a witch executioner was Kwane.
Bani?
Kwane.
Kwane.
Yeah. Now, Kwane also, as a visionary, decided not to kill these people. Every time there was someone who's suspected of being a witch, Kwane would take this person, pretending to kill them, and then kept them in the forest. So these numbers of these people grew in the forest. Then these people intermarried with the Khoisan.
Okay.
And they became a nation in the forest.
Do you know geographically where? Because where I come from in Moshwa, down by Ngoba, the fish reef, I don't know whether
I'm coming to no, this one was in the former Transkei at that time.
Okay.
Because the AmaXhosa, remember that time, were there in the former Transkei and so on.
Okay.
Yeah, so, but there is a forest. Prince Manxiwa knows the place. He says he will show me where this AmaXhosa were kept.
Okay.
Yeah. But anyway, so these people then, just to give you a background, because you'll understand the nature of Tunga, where he comes from, and what made him to be the man he was when he became to be. And so AmaXhosa then, King Chiwa then, he sees himself attacked by AmaXhosa. AmaXhosa wanted to take over the kingdom of AmaXhosa and become the king. So Chiwa then is facing defeat. He was on the verge of defeat by AmaXhosa because they planned everything. I suspect AmaXhosa had other small nations who supported them to overthrow AmaXhosa. Kwane then comes in. He brings this group of people who were condemned to die to come and rescue the king. And then they rescued the king. And then AmaXhosa remained in charge. AmaXhosa were defeated. About 3 or 4 generations later, King Yinsa avenged that by killing all the 16 princes of AmaXhosa and reduced them into people under his son Ungapai. Wati, you will never rule again. You will never become a nation. You will never have a prince.
Wow.
So we neutralize AmaXhosa completely. But coming back to AmaXhosa, King Chiwo, as a reward to Kwane, what I promote you today, you are a prince of AmaXhosa. Uyinkosi AmaXhosa. So AmaXhosa then, because AmaXhosa were growing at that time, they crossed the Khai River and settled from East London down here towards Humansdorp. So this became the land of AmaXhosa.
Are you familiar with the period?
It was at the beginning of 1700.
Okay.
Yeah. So they stayed here for over 50 years, occupying this area. Now, around 1779, as the Boers successfully decimated the Khoisan from Cape Town up to Plettenberg Bay, because around Plettenberg Bay in the book, you'll notice that around 1776, they intensified the systematic extermination of the Khoi. It was done at the industrial scale. It was systematic, it was institutionalized, and the leader of that was Governor Plettenberg.
It was
Plettenberg Bay.
It was done
by
at
governor.
A systematic
Industrial scale.
Industrial scale.
Yeah.
This is the D.E.P with Ongama Mtimka where we discuss development, economics, and politics. We cannot do that unless we understand the history. And I have with me Dr. JJ Klaas, who's taking us through two of his books that he's written. And we're now looking at the triangle of 100 years or 100 years wars. If you want to understand the development dynamics in the Eastern Cape, you have to start from the history. Stay tuned. Well, we are continuing with the show, and we are now dealing with what Dr. Klaas calls the extermination at an industrial scale of the Khoi people from the westerly part of the Cape. Doc, you were starting to explain to us.
What happened since the arrival of the Dutch in the Cape in 1652? Then the populations grew, and there were more immigrants coming from Europe, I think the French, the Germans, and others, but the Dutch were in large majority. Now there was a need for more land, for grazing, and so on, for stock. Now, as they were expanding to the interior towards Mossel Bay, Plettenberg Bay, then they embarked on a systematic extermination of the Khoisan people at an industrial scale. They were commandos given arms and ammunition and horses and resources to basically go on a hunt, shooting and killing the Khoisan on sight. So this was intensified around 1760, 1770, 1776, as they were moving now up to the north to the interior.
These are the Voortrekkers.
These are done by the Voortrekkers. It was led by the Dutch. Now they succeeded to exterminate the Khoisan people. And what made Khoisan people more vulnerable was because of their lifestyles, where they would make fires at night. So these commanders would actually go on a night raid when these people are there sitting on a fire and start mowing them down. Now, this then continued up to Humansdorp. Then when they came here in Gqeberha, Humansdorp area, then they met AmaXhosa. That's when then the Voortrekkers, the Dutch or the Boers, started facing resistance for the first time. AmaXhosa were here at that time were led by Prince Tunga, who occupied this area from Humansdorp up to the Fish River, which is Mlambo Inquba. So they fought the first war in 1779. The second war, 1789. The third war, 1799 to 1802. The fourth, those first three wars were fought by the Boers against Utunga, but they never defeated him. And Utunga successfully defended this place from 1779 up to 1803.
With AmaGqunukhwebe.
Leading AmaGqunukhwebe. Yeah, he was the prince of AmaGqunukhwebe, whose origins I've explained. Now, the British then, in 1795, showed interest to occupy the Cape. Then in 1799, then they built Fort Frederick, which was the first presence they created on the African continent. And then in 1805, then the British made their intentions clear that they want this as part of the world. Then around 1810, Governor Cradock, who was the governor here at that time, John Cradock, gave instructions to Colonel Graham to execute what we call ethnic cleansing of AmaXhosa from Humansdorp up to Fish River. Then the Boers joined the Dutch to say, thanks for coming. We fought Utunga in 3 wars for over 3 decades. We didn't win. Now the British had artillery, had much more advanced weaponry. At that time, Utunga, age-wise, was against him, was old. So in that war then, what changed the dimension of that war is 2 things. The presence now of the British with superior weaponry. And also Tunga had Undlambe of Amandlambe. Undlambe was displaced by King Ngqika around Kaiskamawu. So Tunga gave Undlambe part of the land here up to the Fish River to say, yeah, my brother, let's sit here. That helped Tunga, and because Undlambe was younger. So Ndlambe then took a stand against Colonel Graham after the British killed Tunga in Alexandria in 1811, 1812. So Ndlambe then faced Colonel Graham in the bushes of Ado. He pushed the British army back to Gqeberha, and then they had to use this fort to protect themselves. Later on, then the British army resorted to targeting women and children, killing them. This was an anomaly to AmaXhosa. This was something new. They've fought wars before. They've never seen an opponent targeting productive capabilities of a nation. Even if AmaXhosa defeat a nation, they will never touch women and children because they were seen as the continuity of life. You take these people, you integrate. Hence, amanqakhwane, Ostatu, Ogiqwa, all those nations, they were integrated, were defeated by AmaXhosa and integrated. Dingumsuthu, Singamamvulane, we came here coming from Elusuthu, we were defeated and integrated. If you go to what you call Amamfengu, but the original name is Abambo, they came here moving with Amahlubi and Amangwane in 1828. They were defeated by AmaXhosa, Abathembu, and Amambona. It's King says, Abantu Abalar. Then Abambo, comprised of Amangwane, Amahlubi, Amabele, Jalonjal, were defeated and integrated. So what Inza did then, he even married his own daughter to Prince Njogweni of Amazizi. He took 60 councillors from those defeated people and made them councillors in his kingdom. So Tunga comes from that generation of defeat and integrate. So when the British then committed ethnic cleansing, Ndlambe then retreated across the Khai River. That is why even today, if you cross the Khai River, not the Fish River, as you go up,
Yeah. Yeah.
those were the people who were displaced after that war of 1811. AmaGqunukhwebe had to move towards East London. Abanye, they are around Middle Rift, Alice area.
Wow. Wow, that's amazing. In fact, particular line to Pikoli, the ones who are immediately close to my village, and then further down from there, we in the area that is close to this place where people were also displaced, Amamfengu, Eklenmo.
Yes.
Yes. So, wow, this is amazing. Doc, the show is about economics. What do you think is the economic impact of these wars or its legacy?
I think the legacy of these wars for me, it anchored on the 4 pillars I mentioned yesterday. The issue of dispossession, where you are left with nothing. You don't own anything. 2, displacement from your ancestral land. That displacement was not just a physical displacement. That's when people were cut off permanently from their ancestral land, from their history, from the graves of their father. That's when development was disrupted. The economy of the nation was disrupted. Because when you displace them, you take away all the economics. Not only that, they were dehumanized, changing their names, giving them a foreign religion, giving them anything that is foreign. So those are the economics. Now you had generations since then born into poverty, born with nothing. People who died, and left with nothing because the land was taken. And I always I always say to people, Doc, the debate, for example, about the economics of the land will remain an abstract academic exercise if we do not link it to the real, concrete historical events that happened. We are not being funny or any other thing that someone can call it. If we often make a reference to say, for example, in 1811 and 1812, there were African people who occupied this area. Just one example of the many. But that one is a specific reference because it's got dates and evidence. Where these people lived from Humansdorp up to the Fish River, they owned cows, which was their productive reproduction capability. They had their history. They had their culture. Life was continuing. The nation was developing and flourishing. They were expanding, occupying the territory. Those were the economics. And there was a structure and continuity in the society where there was a hierarchy, where there's a king or a royal ruler. There are councillors, there are headmen, there are families. So life was, they did not need anything. If we come here to say we came here to bring civilization, what civilization? Who benefited from civilization? Because what has actually happened in real fact was people who came, took the land, displaced the people, dehumanized them. And the last part, which is said, Doc, is when people then were commodified. The bodies of the black people were reduced into commodities of labor to work for the new conquerors of the land. So if you talk about towns like Grahamstown, Gqeberha, Cradock, were built by the bodies of the conquered people because they were reduced into commodities. So I think for me, these things are very important. The issue of dispossession, displacement, dehumanization, and commodification. It talks to your question of the economics.
Sure. Yeah. So we have, when we teach South African politics, when I teach South African politics, the first few lectures in my class begin with the historical. And also, this year I got to teach state, society, and economy in Africa. And it was good for me to, I challenged myself to say, I'm not going to teach as inherent modules as they were. I'm going to look at pre-colonial Africa, the glory days of the continent, and then look at, the processes of impoverization and what happened afterwards. People would say, this is how history has been throughout the world. In fact, throughout the history of human society, whether you believe creationist narratives or you believe evolutionist or evolutionary narratives, that the history of the peopling of the world is a history of conflicts and dispossession and consolidations. And people would say that what we have in the world today is a function of who was more military powerful. And as a result of that, what we do in modern times is to build nation states on better, constitutional imperatives to try and avoid the idea of the world being the terrain of the strong and the mighty. But you've got a view that there was, in fact, we're not a walk in the park for the colonialists. You've mentioned Tunga, you've mentioned Ndlambe's resistance. There are other wars where you say, generals of the British were humiliated. Can you mention some of those?
Maybe before I mention, I want to come back to the comment you made earlier on to say, generally, this is how the world works. Those who are victorious rule the world, right? I want to start on that one.
Sure.
And you went further to say, as part of the nation building, we need now build constitution, I think that's where the danger, that's a big mistake we did in South Africa.
Sure.
Where we said in 1994, what has happened has happened. Let's build a new South Africa. Let's build a constitution. For me, that was an injustice at a what catastrophic level, where we misled our people. You know what we did? We cannot reverse history. We cannot reverse what has happened. But what we did in 94, we omitted the responsibility to address what has happened. Where when we came in 94, 95% of the land was not in the hands of the Africans. We pretended that the situation would just work itself out. Let's just have a good constitution. Margaret Thatcher used to say when she was a British Prime Minister, you cannot legislate the poor out of poverty. And then they wake up tomorrow, have money. Even in South Africa, even if we had constitution, the constitution was not a vehicle to liberate African people from a state of nothingness to own something.
So remember now, this system is born out of the practicalities of a stalemate. And that's what you get if you fail to overthrow your enemy in practical terms by war. In fact, that's why you had such a long process of struggle. It's because from a battlefield perspective, you just didn't have that luxury in 94.
No, Doc, my point is, again, I didn't mean to say in 94 we're supposed to have done a radical thing, take the chair and land. Sure. What I'm saying, this thing is systematic. Mandela's and others did everything they could under the circumstances. The fact that there was a negotiated settlement, it was a major breakthrough. They played their part, finish and clear.
Sure.
We praised them. But I think where we missed it, the opportunity, was when we had 67% votes to change the constitution in the second administration or third administration. What I expected the government to do at that time, if they were serious enough, was to set up a commission of academics, economics, thinkers in the society, to say, now we've got 67%, we can change the constitution. We are not going to push anybody abroad. But let's start an RDP, a Marshall Plan, where we channel resources to at least have a fair distribution of land and resources. You don't do a slogan thing. You set a commission. You even have a department running that with academics and all the thinkers. You send researchers all over the world to do research on land ownership. And then this thing must look professional. The people come back. Once they come back, then you address the issue of land redistribution all over a systematic period of time. So for me, my issue is not about Mandela's. My issue was the second and third administration, which did not take the issue of land ownership seriously. Which I agree with Tunga to say, the issue of land in South Africa has got nothing to do with white people. It's got nothing to do with the capital. It's got nothing to do with outsiders. It has to do with the lack of political will to address the problem.
Dr. JJ Klaas is saying there is a different way in which we could have dealt with land ownership in South Africa. Among other things, is calling for a thinking and a studying process which doesn't take the land patterns as a given, but says we come in, we have a lot of people sitting around studying and exploring ways in which we could create a path to an inclusive land ownership regime. We come back to that topic. He's telling me about how great the military strategies were of some of our kings and princes. Dr. Klaas?
Thank you, Hlati. Just want to reiterate the point that we are born by some of the greatest people ever lived on planet Earth. When John Barrow arrived in this city in 1796, he passed here to the capital town of AmaXhosa in Kamahoko. When he met AmaXhosa for the first time, he says, I've traveled all over the world. I've never seen such people. Perhaps these are the best human beings ever created on planet Earth. In terms of their natural disposition, their bodies were bronze, the fearlessness in their face, and the sense of contentment that they have. And he says to Britain, if you want to conquer these people, we have to work very hard. That report he wrote was not meant for you and me. It was meant for the British government. Robin Barrow wrote this in 1796. The 100 years which happened later on proved him right.
Wow.
To show that AmaXhosa were such greater strategies. After they lost the Battle of Grahamstown in 1819, they vowed that this will never happen again. We made a mistake of marching to the cold face of the British artillery during the day.
The war, this is the war led by Klass.
Yes, and Dushan. Now, about 17 years later, in 1835, Smith, the hero of Alwal, who was a military commander here, he was at D.E.P, challenged AmaXhosa into a war on the shores of the Great Fish River. He was defeated there by AmaXhosa led by Maqoma, by Unqeno of Amambalo. There were leaders there from Imidange, Amagwali, Amaqunukwe. But because the British didn't want to admit defeat, they crossed the Kai River and to attack the less battle-hardened Amaqaleka, which led to the death of King Gitsa. Now, Maqoma then challenged them to the mountains of Matol in 1835. The British encounter with AmaXhosa on the mountains of Matol was so historical that it marked the first defeat of the British Army in Africa. And Sir Benjamin Durban was fired and he died in Canada.
This is
1835. Smith was fired and then sent to India to redeem his military career. 11 years later, the British sent a Waterloo war veteran, Knight of Hanover, Major General John Hare, the man who defeated Napoleon in Europe, the man who's been in the army for 40 years, to come and finish off AmaXhosa in 1846. The British were saying this must end now. They defeated us in 1835, now want to exterminate them and occupy this area now from Port Elizabeth up to the Kai River. So Hare, that was his mandate. So when he marched into the heartland of AmaXhosa, which was Matole Mountains, that was their core area of resistance. Hare, in a war that was meant to last for 3 months, Mostert in his book, The Frontier, says, by far, this was the worst humiliating defeat the British had ever suffered on the African continent. A war that was meant to last for 3 months suddenly finished in one day. When Major General John Hare saw that devastation, he was shattered. He resigned, collapsed, and died. Second War. Now, the British, years later, then, they sent Smith, who obliterated the Indians in the town of Alwal in 1846. They said, go back to South Africa to avenge your defeat by Maqoma in 1835, to avenge the defeat of Hare in 1846. Smith arrives here. He met Maqoma here in Port Elizabeth and says to him, I'm going to kill you. And Maqoma laughed. Eventually, on the 24th of December, 1850, the War of Mlanjeni broke out in a battle in Kaiskamahoek, where Maqoma's younger brother, King Sandile, dismantled Lieutenant Colonel George Mackinnon on the shores of the Sandile Dam. The defeat in that battle marked the beginning of what became the longest and the deadliest war ever fought between Africans and Europeans in Africa. Even the War of Ethiopia fighting Italy in the Battle of Adwa in 1892 doesn't come closer to that one. But what the tragedy is that the only war we hear happened in South Africa was the Anglo-Boer War. They omitted that war. Why they omitted it? One, Major General John Smith was defeated and sent back to India, in UK. He never recovered from his that defeat in the War of Mlanjeni was his second defeat in Africa. Went back home, died of an attack a few years later. Major General Somerset, the son of Lord Charles Somerset, was defeated and that was sent back to UK. Britain then sent Colonel Fordyce of the second 72 Highlanders, the battalion. They said to Fordyce, you are our last hope. If we are defeated, we need to change the strategy. Because this is the third war fighting AmaXhosa. The British tried to put all the resources into this war because they couldn't stand defeat of 1835, defeat of 1846. So in the War of Mlanjeni, they had to win. But AmaXhosa waged that war in tones around Fort. That war was fought mainly around Fort, the fortress of Fort Beaufort, Alice, Middle Rift, Kaiskamahoek, on those mountains. That's where AmaXhosa was standing, because that's the only place they could neutralize the firepower of the British artillery. They could neutralize the British battalions. They could neutralize the guns because they are attacking from the bushes. What AmaXhosa did during that war, they never allowed the British to settle. They will always attack them when they are moving. Mostert says that every 500 soldiers who entered Mtonsi, only half of them came back alive. On the third year, the British were walking on the bones of their combatants. It was ruthless. They call Mtonsi Mount Misery because they suffered misery of the highest distinction. When Fordyce was sent there as the last hope, he was killed in the battlefield. That meant the end of the war, because there was nothing else left. The government of John Russell in September 1852 in Britain collapsed because they were channeling the resources to the war. It cost his prime ministership. Britain was forced to surrender Orange Free State and Transvaal. You may recall that in the first war of the defeat in 1835, it forced the Boers to leave this place and establish Transvaal and Orange Free State. But it's a nailing AmaXhosa. The Great Trek we often hear about was not triggered by the tensions between the British and the Afrikaners. It was triggered by the defeat. Because the Afrikaners felt that if AmaXhosa defeat the British, what else is left?
How are they? What is the story of their settlement at this time, and and how were they embroiled in the conflicts? Were they part of the British armies?
Remember, they started becoming part. Remember, the Boers were frustrated by Tunga in the wars.
Yes.
So when the British came in 1812, successfully pushed AmaXhosa across the Fish River, the Boers were also benefactors of this because they were participating in the war. So it became convenient for the Boers to assist the British, because after every victory, they are given more cows taken from AmaXhosa, more land, again, politics of the economy.
Sure.
Yeah, so it was it was more convenient for them to assist the British because there were benefits. But after that war of 1835, they felt that even the very same people were hoping that they will help us are defeated. So why are we here? Let's just leave.
Wow.
So my last point, why AmaXhosa were able to wage wars? They developed supply lines. They kept a small army that was agile and moving. They did what they call military rotation. They used a shock and awe approach. You hear about shock and awe approach used by the Americans in Iraq in 1990. It was used by AmaXhosa in 1850 in the War of Mlanjeni. They deploy women and children to monitor the movement of the British Army. They dictated the military rules of engagement by dictating where the war should be fought. That's why they were able to win the war. So after those 3 wars, then the British resorted to the biological weapon, cattle destruction, by bringing infected cattle with lung sickness, which then decimated 90% of the productive capabilities of AmaXhosa. That leads to my conclusion that actually, in this part of this world, we are the only nation, the only people whose conquest was never attained in the battlefield, but it was through the introduction of the biological weapon of cattle destruction.
Sure. So the cattle destruction happens, and I think Tembeka Ncukaitobi describes in graphic detail how that process marks the mass impoverization following the famine, and then says in droves, AmaXhosa starts, in fact, quotes diaries of people saying they started flooding into British Kaffraria, looking for a job, dealing with an issue which had been a problem of labor supply for quite some time. We then move, and you talk about how after the discoveries of mining, the system of migrant labor further entrenches the impoverization of the Eastern Cape. You wanna comment about that?
Yes, but it served 2 purposes. it was the impoverization. And also, again, it was a continuation of the war where if you take men from these villages, you destroy the essence of nationhood. Because you had societies, sons growing up without their fathers. So again, it was part of that systematic subjugation. We have to make sure that we don't only impoverize them, we destroy the essence of their nationhood. We destroy the families. So Tina, on the periphery, you often think that when abantu besiya join the Gauteng, ayobheka joining, it's an opportunity. It was not. The fact that people were meant to stay there for a year, it's compulsory. If you are there, it's not because it was going to be difficult for people to go home after every 3 months. It's to make sure that you cut that umbilical cord. You destroy that family. And the sad thing about that, Doc, is that it didn't end there. For me, the issue of drugs in our society, the issue of men being who they are, most of them today, is still is a continuation of that. Someone made a comment to say, if you go to rural areas of Ngoshwa, the adverts that you see, they're about loans, they're about liquor, and so on. So if you go to places like Port Alfred, you see an advert about property ownership. You see about people selling tractors. So the war of the economics today is deep-seated, yet it's subtle. It still continues. So that economic exclusion we saw upon the discovery of gold and diamond is still happening today in our societies, where you want to reduce the predominantly black areas into areas of drug addiction, areas of substance abuse, areas of hopelessness. That for me is a subtle form of that oppression, which still continues. All you do, you just create an impression where you take few African people, you give them money, you make them multimillionaires, and then you create a sense of normality, which is not there.
Sure, sure. Wow. Wow, these are obviously the hard issues that our country is grappling with. You're saying we can start with land. What is the outcome of this process? What are we seeking to achieve um, with redistribution of land?
I think for me, it's not only the issue of economics when you talk about the redistribution of land. You talk about rebuilding the broken African identity. You talk about restoration of the dignity of the African people. You talk about the restoration of their nationhood as a nation. We still have numbers on our side. We can redress the issue of land distribution in South Africa. Still not late. We just need a collective will to address this problem in a proper way, not just through slogans. I do believe, Doc, that South Africa is blessed with some of the finest brains on planet Earth. If we had a rugby team in 2019 winning the Rugby World Cup, had 6 black players there, one of them captained that team, and continue to win the next World Cup again, it shows you that we do have capability in South Africa. But what is lacking is a collective political will to address these problems. I do believe that in South Africa, the issue of huge inequalities, the issue of land distribution, it's something we can do it within a space of 5 to 10 years. It can happen in our lifetime. As long as we've got sincerity, we've got that willingness to address it without antagonizing the other. We're not saying other people must leave South Africa. We're not going to shout about you taking our land, no. But we're saying, let's have an inclusive policy of land ownership.
Yeah, because the majority of average South Africans live in urban centers. So my understanding is you're not saying expropriate urban properties. You're saying the vast tracts of agricultural lands can be redistributed in more equitable ways.
Yes.
There you have it. Any last words, Doc?
My last words is a quote I saw on the Sunday Times in 1987. I quote, "Originality and free thinking are not always encouraged, in an environment of conformity. But so often, they are the eyes which open, they are the keys which open the eyes of the many, unquote. We can still do it. As Mandela used to say, it is in our hands.
Thank you. Thank you, Doc. Thank you. Thank you so much. So, as you've heard it, AmaXhosa, when they speak, talk about how Sipola ngokuthunukwa. It heals by getting pricked, or it heals while getting pricked, which means a wound has to be attended to, has to be addressed. And that addressing actually pricks it and makes it a lot more painful. But the idea is that the pain itself is the path to the healing, as Ryan Holiday argues in his book, The Obstacle is the Way. So we are continuing the conversations. And the idea is with humility, with a critical mind, and with openness, to open ourselves to this free thinking and innovation so that we can find the path, even if it's through pricking the wounds, to a more united, but on the basis of truth and substance, rather than on the basis of glossing over some of the truths and not wanting to speak to them. If South Africa in 2024 is going to have a much more sustainable path to building, it's going to be through the roots. Thank you for joining us.
Progressive conversation, an ecosystem, a combination of politics and economics, a vision of growth. Ongama Mtimka steering the boat. So take note as we develop potential sustainable generational wealth. D.E.P, the ultimate essential, relevant for the whole entire continent. Dialogue, dynamic discourse.